Yeah.
I end up for Eagle Mount right now. Woo! Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Patrick, and we're going to carry on.
Excellent. Just to go over a little review of what we got going today. I am Patrick Quinn. I am the director for the Bridger program. There are 3 team members that are not with us tonight, and that is Kelly Kruger. She is volunteer coordinator for the Bridger program, as well as Colleen Smith, who is a Bridger assistant, and then Corbin Merchant, who is Sarah's Big Sky assistant this year. Kelly and Corbin were both volunteers last year. You may recognize them, and we're really excited to introduce him to you soon. Zoom housekeeping. Many of you were here last week. We're going to run a program. Barbara, my mother, is going to do a little lecture about cognitive intellectual disabilities. Then we'll switch over into physical disabilities, finishing with how we use this information. And then there will be time for questions. Last week we did the chat box, so find your chat box down there on the bottom bar if you want to type in questions. And we want to try to also do verbal questions. So if you have one and you want to speak to the group, find that raise the hand button. Save that for the end, but find that raise the hand button underneath the participants tab, usually on the right side. And if you have a question, raise the hand and I will ask to unmute you one at a time, and we can ask our questions or make our comments. So that's a little change this week. All right. Barbara.
Hello.
Take it away.
All righty, so I'm Barb Quinn, Pat's mom, and I work in developmental disabilities for 23 years, and now I'm in practice in internal medicine and pediatrics, but I still do a large amount of developmental diagnosis and interventions. So I'm back this week. Last week we talked mostly about behavioral challenges, and let's do a quick recap of that so that we can kind of see if we consolidated that information and if people have any thoughts or ideas about it. So first question, true or false? It is more important to establish gains than goals. What do people think? Do.
All right. And the way I have it set up, Mom, is to they're going to do, yeah, and then we'll show the results the way it's structured at the moment.
Okay. We react to what we attribute the cause of our participants' behavior. True or false? Communication, socialization, and cognitive skills all play into behavior. True or false? We do not affect or reinforce the emotional reactions of a participant. True or false?
So there should be some polling that's popped up on your screen for those watching, where you can fill out your answers.
And then intentional learning is far more powerful than inadvertent learning. True or false?
Great, they're coming in. They're coming in hot.
You guys all look so intense answering the questions.
I know.
Yeah, there's some heavy negotiation going on too, I see.
Active listening last week.
Were most of the people here, the same people here last week, Pat?
I recognize a lot of people from last week, but I bet you it's a nice mix. All right, it looks like we have the majority. We'll end this poll and we'll share the results with everybody.
Okay, let's do each one. It's more important to establish gains. Yes, we talked about that goals are important and we want to set a bar and try to reach for it. But when we're talking about people with a wide range of disabilities and we're talking about a recreational activity such as skiing, what we really want to establish is a sense that the child and the volunteer are making gains and that they're feeling good about that session that day. Every interaction should, every day on a ski hill should be a positive experience. So gains can be more important. That was a shift up. I think I talked to you about that last week in my thinking in dealing with setting goals at school. We're so educationally goal directed all the time, and that it's important to put a bar out there and try to reach for it. but there are times in our lives when we don't want to be jumping for a bar. We want to be moving forward and making gains and feeling good about that. We react to what we attribute the cause of our participants' behavior. That's absolutely true. I'm glad we sent that point home last week. How we perceive or where we perceive that behavior coming from is what we react to. So it's real important that we kind of do a little bit Sherlock Holmesing, think about the contributory behaviors to the child's behavior, and then think about how we want to react accordingly. And then, of course, the things we talked about were communication, socialization, and cognitive ability all play into how a child is, or an adult, a participant with a disability, is reacting to an activity. We do not affect or reinforce the emotional reactions of a participant. That is false. Emotional reaction is highly reinforceable, and it duplicates itself based on that. And I use the example of the 2-year-old toddler who tantrums. And if they're tantruming because they want a second ice cream cone, and you give them the second ice cream cone, the next time you stop at 1 ice cream cone, what are you going to get? You're going to get a behavior. So I want you to remember that example, because you definitely feed emotional reaction. Emotional reaction is highly, highly reinforceable by our actions. That's why kind of planned ignoring sometimes is excellent with younger children, and setting up our own, I used to call it a program I did, The Sky Is Not Falling. And I think about a father, a child was going to go outside and walk across grass, and the mother said, don't let him go outside. And I said, why can't this child go outside? And it was because he felt like the grass cut his feet. And the mother was essentially yelling at the father for letting him outside. And I said, well, we can't act like the sky is falling because the child feels like the sky is falling. We got to get him flip-flops. And from that came a program that we started that was called The Sky's Not Falling. And that's a really important thought. Intentional learning is far more powerful than inadvertent learning. Oh, this one almost split. Interesting. No is the answer. It's false. Unintentional learning can have a ton of power, particularly in people who cannot communicate well. And my example for that last week was when you get off the ski lift, if you hit the salty sand and your skis buck, and now you're all great skiers, but again, me, I don't like that feeling. I feel out of control. I feel like I'm going to hold up the people behind me, and it's going to be a horrible thing. So the minute I get on a ski lift, I always think about the exit of the ski lift. Inadvertent learning. Nobody will teach the child that that's bumpy, that that feels weird, or that, but they will be thinking about that. That's inadvertent learning. And in children with developmental disabilities and adults with cognitive delays in particular, inadvertent learning is very, very powerful. And important for us to remember, because we often are not aware of what that lesson was to the child. We don't know what it was, right? Because it wasn't on our agenda. So good recall from last week. And of course, it's everybody who works with anybody in this field. Biggest challenge is, I think, always behavioral response and understanding it. I would say that we get more questions and concerns around that than probably any other area concerning that, and toilet training are our two biggies. Okay, so Pat asked me to go over a little bit, a brief overview of developmental disorders. Obviously, this could be a 7-day lecture series. So I'm just going to give you little blurbs, and then I'm going to ask, I don't know your population. So if you have worked with clients, or if you know of particular disorders, or if you've heard of things, certainly there's been an awful lot of press around autism in the last decade. So any questions you have, I'm happy to address, but I'm just going to kind of give a thumbnail sketch of hopefully what you're looking at in your population there. So let's start with autistic spectrum disorder, which became an alphabet soup of letters over the last 15 years. Pervasive developmental disorder, autistic spectrum disorder, straight Kanner's autism, Asperger's syndrome, then Asperger's disorder, then high functioning disorder. Currently, the accurate vernacular for it is autistic spectrum disorder. There is no longer classification to Asperger's syndrome, but don't tell an adult with Asperger's that. They really own that diagnosis. They really have come to understand it. And I say it's splitting hairs. If a patient tells me they have Asperger's, I'm not going to correct them and tell them, well, actually your ICD code is, it doesn't matter, right? And there is a sense of personal being with adults who have been raised under the concept of a developmental disorder. And this is very, very true in autism. I would say I lost track of the years here, but I would say 10 to 15 years ago now, probably, we really started identifying autism more, and prevalence rates increased, but also diagnosis did. And so we were left with this kind of spectrum. The biggest issues, and there's a huge variability in functionality across a huge domain. So the three areas that are impacted in autistic spectrum disorders are communication skills, socialization abilities, and restricted patterns. Those three areas are what you see at play in their personalities. There is one thing I want you to think about for a second. If I told you you were going to have 10 5-year-olds at the base of the hill, think about what you would think of those children. 10 different children. If I said to you, I'm going to give you a group of 10 children with Down syndrome, what do you think about? And that would be true for many of the developmental disabilities. When I ask that question and I'm able to get verbal response, very often people take a developmental disability and they assign it globally. Like the child with Down syndrome is going to present as. Well, when you say you're going to have 10 neurotypically developing children, you know you've got 10 different boogers there, right? And you're going to have from A to Z in energy level, activity skill level, responsiveness. You're going to have Chatty Cathy and then the social worker of the future, I always call them, that, you know, you're going to get these different personalities, right? We get the same thing when you put a grouping of 10 people with developmental disabilities together. So we can't collectively say, oh, this is autism. It's autism with a personality, right? It's autism with a temperament. It's autism with a history and a family and a story. So they're all very, very individual. They just are connecting to the world in a different way than most other people do. The socialization connection is neurologically driven. And I like to tell people that because it is not experiential. You know, that goes back to the 60s when we thought autism was experiential. Socialization development is a neurologic process that evolves over from birth on, and it has a pattern and a predictability, and we can now scan brains and get a sense for what areas are hot and what areas are not. And it's the socialization piece that is what's most altered in a person with autistic spectrum disorder. From that segues their communication skills. For a person with Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism, the language comes out. So I mentioned this last week. You feel like they're very verbose, and you feel like that you should be able to talk to them in a very communicative style because they speak so much. But a lot goes out and a lot doesn't come in. And what's coming out from them is often a rumination, repetitive pattern, very self-directed, and often very topic-driven for their area of topic. And it's hard to get them on our area. So you feel like they're going to converse because they say so much, and we have to caution ourselves that that doesn't mean they're getting what we're saying. We still have to use less words and more action with them. There are not a lot of physical handicapping issues with children with autistic spectrum disorder. There is an increased prevalence of seizure disorder. Other than that, there is not some of them can have low tone, which is floppy body, and a little less motor planning, but there is not a physical disability per se to that disorder. Let's leapfrog over to some chromosomal abnormalities and Down syndrome, Williams syndrome. When I talked about the scans that we look at with people with autistic spectrum disorder and the areas that don't get hot are the socialization areas. When you look at children with Down syndrome and Williams syndrome, their socialization areas just go wild. They are wired for socialization. They're wired for socialization at the expense of everything else. They are, personally, it's why I find them so affable and so enjoyable to be with, because they just love you up. They give you a lot of loving. They are very, very effusive. Now, again, you have personality traits. Like I had a mother once say to me, I always thought that children with Down syndrome were so outgoing, and my child, well, I said, your child is shy. You know, you have a shy child. So again, personality plays in here. In Down syndrome, I don't know if you have Williams syndrome, but it's, I put them together because they tend to have similar styles of learning. They are very sociable at the expense of anything else. They're very impulsive, and most of them have some level of intellectual disability. There is a version of Down syndrome that's called mosaic. All the genetic information is not impacted, and interestingly, those individuals are not on the intellectual disability camp, but most of them are. IQs are generally less than 70 in all of them. They do have medical problems associated. They have some high incidence of thyroid disease. They have a high incidence of leukemia, would you believe? So there are different things, vision problems, hearing problems, heart problems. So they do have, as a medical provider, they have a lot more medically that we follow. And that may impact their experience recreationally, but most likely not. The issue with them, I would think, on a ski hill is to utilize the idea that they want to be social beings, to do things in small group, or to do, the motivation is to then meet with somebody for the hot chocolate, or the friendship that you make between yourself and that individual is going to be very big. Relationship development is going to be very big in your power with children on this genetic realm. Cerebral palsy, quickly. Cerebral palsy is very misunderstood, and often because they have differences in appearance. And so people have a connection that they have cognitive disability. Many, many, many people with cerebral palsy do not have any cognitive disability. The disability in cerebral palsy is motor skill. There is difficulty in the brain that is cracked early on. We see it by imaging, and then there is sequelae, or there is reaction from the body to the brain injury, essentially. It can be one-sided. It can be, you know, depending on where the injury is, that's how cerebral palsy impacts the individual. It's usually in the realm of spasticity. So they're usually stiff and tight and have hard time with motor movement. So the accommodations that you're going to make for this kind of individual is very, very different than what you're going to make for a child with autistic spectrum disorder who has no motor impairment, but can't really connect to you and imitate you. These children are incredibly imitative. They really drive off of trying to imitate and learn from experiential learning. And they can do really, really well. Adaptive technology, which Patrick's real good at, he can help you with that for people with cerebral palsy. My big take home on cerebral palsy is don't make the assumption that they have cognitive impairment. Because they can't talk to you because of motor skill doesn't mean it's not in there. They certainly can learn well. Patrick, raise your hand to me. Do you have any muscular dystrophy or neuromuscular disorders?
Yes.
Okay, so those disorders are based on muscle reaction and nervous system reaction. Those disorders, unfortunately, tend to be progressive. The other ones I've talked to you about so far are not. Cerebral palsy does not progress. It's injury prenatally or perinatally. It does not get worse, okay? Autistic spectrum disorder is a static brain situation. It's wired as it is, and that is not going to worsen over time. Down syndrome, Williams syndrome, genetic disorders, what you kind of got in your genetic map stays the same for life. In neuromuscular disorders, many of them are degenerative. They deteriorate. In muscular dystrophy in particular, there are various forms of muscular dystrophy, but it's how the muscle is able to get information and metabolize and use that information. And they get floppy. They can get some spasticity, but mostly they get low tone. And I would think a real take home for muscular dystrophy and neuromuscular disorder is to make accommodations and not think that that's stagnant in time. Make sure that if weakness progresses, that you're progressing with that. So if accommodations might need to be different, the child that you could do, I don't know if you guys still do the hula hoops around them, that's how we used to help kids get balance. You might not be able to do that at a certain time. You might need more structure, more support, more for them over time. They are, cognitively, they can be just fine. Cognitive skills often don't decline, which is really heartbreaking. Not that you want decline in cognitive skills, but it's heartbreaking that you watch children who lose their abilities. And that's pretty hard. Interestingly, I think I mentioned last week, I'm flanked by my son doing this field, and my father did this. He ran a camp for children with muscular dystrophy in the 60s and 70s, and would like cut wood out to take kids water skiing so that he could do different things that we couldn't do now, probably because of liability and equipment and everything else. But so I was raised kind of helping do recreation outside with people with muscular dystrophy, and it was really fascinating to get to do that. Another disability that I don't know if you see this exclusively, if this qualifies for your program, but it is attention deficit hyperactive disorder. That, yes, Sarah's shaking yes to me. So that disorder is an authentic, genuine challenge and creates disability in the child. It has become a little more, I don't know how to put this, like culturally driven, particularly in school evaluations and that kind of thing. I would say when I was still working exclusively in developmental pediatrics, I would say 80% of the issues that we had were behaviors coming from children with difficulty sustaining attention and very poor self-control. And it was kind of, the diagnosis was sought, you know, they were like, not just for justification of why the child and understanding the child, but I think there's kind of, and this might, and maybe this isn't as prevalent in Montana as it is in New York State, but I really do feel that there was a push for a while to diagnose children who didn't have self-control with ADHD. And I was not in agreement with that push. I think there's a lot of reason, again, when you look at attribution theory, why a child is doing something tells us how we react to it. And if we assume, oh, this isn't in their control, they have a developmental disability, and we don't give them that control, that's real problematic. So I guess I'm saying culturally, I think that diagnosis has been very overused. Having said that, when it is authentic and it is used authentically and it is diagnosed properly, it is a case of the frontal lobe, the front of the brain, this part here is underfunctioning. I don't know if you ever stop to think, one of the treatments for ADHD is stimulants. So why do you stimulate the brain in a child who can't settle down? It's because you've got this frontal lobe suppression, and what you're trying to do is increase the frontal lobe. And I like to explain it as you're bringing in temp service. So if I'm in my exam setting and I'm working with a family and I have my chart and I know the family's name and everything's good to go, that's because I had a nurse and 2 secretaries get everything good to go. Say there's no secretary checking somebody in. I might not know, what room am I supposed to be in? Where am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to be doing? What is the problem on the page here? So my organizational approach, I've got the same skill in that exam setting, but coming into the exam setting is different. That's what we consider executive function. So if you can think of medications in ADHD as bringing in temp service, what you're doing is increasing the frontal lobe so that information is more organized and better able to be processed and received. The medications are not panaceas. They do not change behavior. What they do is give the capacity of the brain to stop and think. If a child has gotten into patterns, of reacting, which we all do, they're going to continue those patterns whether they are on medications or not. And this is a point I make to anybody that I agree to medicate, is that we also have to have in place the appropriate behaviors on our part and strategies to support them in moving forward. And I would think this is critical on the ski hill, because the idea of stop, think is the biggest piece. And the medication is not going to make them think. The medication is going to give them the time available to stop and organize their thinking. And that's going to give us the opportunity to teach that skill. And I think that it would be tremendous on a ski hill. So what else did I want to say? That none of these disorders, but ADHD in particular, does not define the child. It isn't, you know, the autistic child, the ADHD child, the Down syndrome child. It's the child who has, right? It's the child there. It's a component of who they are. And it's not, you don't introduce me as the female Barbara. You know, we don't tag names to people who are neurotypical, yet we do when people have developmental disabilities. And I think that's a really important point for all individuals that we work with, that this is a component that flavors how they learn and flavors how they process information and flavors how they approach the world. And they're still the individual first. They're still Sally, Joe, Marianne, and their communication is impacted because they have autistic spectrum disorder. And that's something that I work constantly, because, and I'm guilty of it too. I'll get a report of somebody and I get a preconceived notion from an evaluator or a specialist that I value, and I get it and I think, oh, here's, you know, so-and-so autistic, and then I go in and I never cease to amaze myself, to slap myself on the face and think, oh my goodness, get a load of this. This is not what I was expecting. Because there's sitting a young woman who has questions for me and wants to know what I think about XYZ. And I'm thinking it's going to be a person who can't talk and relate and communicate to me. So we really have to be careful. So that's just a thumbprint of the disorders. We're learning more about them all the time. Genetics is behind everything these days. It's behind runny noses these days. Genetics is really where everything is in our diagnostic realm now. Physical handicaps, I'll just brushstroke that as well. Obviously, people have physical handicaps, missing limbs, amniotic banding is a big reason people have physical, like they'll be missing a hand or an arm or like that, and that's something that was congenital. People can have injuries and lose limbs. I think my experience in working with children, we tried to do some groups once, and it's very difficult for children who are totally neurotypical, who have essentially injuries to limbs, to be paired with cognitive deficits and emotional deficits. I think it's very unsettling for them. And I know that in programs we have to, you know, logistically we have to do that, but I would caution that. And when you pair people, you know, like if you got two little guys who have physical impairments, like to put them together, obviously I would think would be more beneficial to the experience that you're giving them. Even though, you know, it is a world of integration, we want everybody integrated. I feel like in a setting where you're trying to give them this joyous experience and this opportunity to do something that's really a fun and recreational activity that can really enrich their lives, to really put all our efforts into making it as positive an experience for the individual as we can. Okay, are there any other disabilities I didn't hit on, Patrick, or anything else you can think about?
Just a special consideration for spinal cord injury.
Oh, spinal cord injury. So spinal cord injury is, did you have any spina bifida as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so that has to do with where on the spine it's impacted. One of the biggest issues for spinal cord injury and spina bifida, which is essentially a spinal cord injury caused by a sacking around the spinal cord, where the level of the injury is what the level of the physical disability is. So the lower ones are better because they affect less. The higher you go, the more things are affected. You're going to have a fair amount of secondary physical issues, bladder, bowel, eating issues, those kind of things can really be at play because they don't have control of their limbs 1 to 4. The limbs can end up, they don't know that the limb is getting cold, the limb is getting injured. You really got to watch out for injury, pressure points in ski boots, that kind of thing, because they won't feel those as well. So those kind of injuries and physical needs would be more particular, very individual to the person and how their disability presents and where their disability is. People with spina bifida can also have had hydrocephalus, which is when the injury is bad enough on the spinal cord, it also goes to the head. These children, usually they can have physically larger heads. Some of them don't have physically larger heads because now we're able to shunt that fluid off sooner. So we used to see a lot of children with hydrocephalus that had really big heads. Now we can shunt fluid and sometimes they don't have such big heads, but there's a fair amount of cognitive damage and issues with those children. Again, that's a subset. If you have individuals with different disabilities and you need to know more and you want to get my input on maybe what's playing in or what might be difficult, I'm happy to troubleshoot individuals. Obviously, you got to get parent consent for this, but I'd be happy to talk through, so-and-so has this, these are the limitations and what will we do. Physically, colostomy bags or urinary, anything like that, I'm happy to help you with or to help you understand.
Great. You covered many things, Mother. Thank you.
I'm seeing a note about PTSD for veterans.
Ooh, good consideration.
Oh, I just started working with PTSD when I moved into the big grown-up world 5 years ago. It is tough, boy. In terms of how it's going to impact you on skiing, it can either be a very, very impairing situation of their autonomic nervous system. So essentially, they're on guard. As a result of the trauma they've experienced, their nervous system is prepared for trauma. So they're on guard, and they can be on guard all the time. People in combat very much have this. Children who had significant physical abuse, heartbreaking. Their nervous systems are absolutely distraught. They can act very ADHD when they've been abused because their agitation makes them act out. What are the triggers for the person? Now, I have a young woman right now who is in Afghanistan, and her biggest problems are at night. She can't close her eyes. How sad is that? Our poor service people. And that's because when she did, she was afraid something was going to happen that she was going to miss that put people at risk. She was some kind of a guard. And so her issue is very specific to times when she feels she's going to be on guard. So I would think maybe in the ski realm to maybe have a conversation with that person about what are the things that are triggers, or, is it, in Vietnam, I know that a lot of them had what they call jungle fear, being enclosed in jungle and again, your nervous system totally on 24/7, and then you get into a forest and it kicks in. So it's essentially your nervous system gets wired and can't kick out of that wiring. On a ski hill, I'd go back to what are the triggers. Panic attacks are really what you see, but you would need to know what kinds of triggers there are, and ahead of time, what kinds of things help your panic. How does your panic present, and what kind of things help your panic? There are different strategies we can use for a panic control. And again, I'm happy to give those to you or help you individually with those. I've had some success with a couple. Sensory visualization is a good one, which I can share with Pat, and if you need something like that.
Great. And if that's where, I think that's a good place to kind of pause on identifying things and classifying things and shift into, I just want to put up a slide about what we're expecting of you. So give me one moment to share my screen here. All right. So that was a lot of information, and how we use that information and how we understand that information is important when we apply it to adaptive snow sports and to other people in our lives. Let's just run down this list and come across some of these things. Sarah and Barb, if you want to jump in when it's applicable.
I like that first one a lot.
That first one we've already hit on. Consider first person language. Instead of saying the autistic kid, a child with autism. Down's kid, a child with Down syndrome. Now, if you note, I put consider first person first language. Not everybody wants this. A lot of people with autism identify that and take that label, and it's a part of their identity. So I like this as a starting point, but really learning individuals and how they want to be spoken to is important. That kind of segues into labels in general and where our mind goes when we hear these labels. We've heard many, many terms from Mom tonight, impairment, disability, a lot of these things, we think of them, they have a stigma attached to them naturally. In the way the society is built up around us, sometimes we have to deprogram this out of our mind. We think of something and then we add a stigma to it. We pity that person. We think of them as lesser. And I'm not saying we do, but sometimes in society, language triggers our brain to go there. So using appropriate language is super important. If you are, if let's say, I like to think of this kind of as age appropriate language. So whoever's in front of us, we approach them as if they're anyone of that age. We're not going to change our inflection or our style with a adult with autism. If they're an adult, we're not going to treat them like a child. A lot of these stigmas are built in, but we're going to use appropriate language, focusing on their abilities. Once we deconstruct some of the ways we use these language, some of the labels or things we attach to the labels, once we deconstruct those, we can better focus on their abilities. So when we have a student in front of us and we've learned all this information from Barbara and we're running through these clinical terms on the ski hill, we've read our bio sheet, we know what's going on, we still need to leave space to say who is in front of us, figure that out, and if that information ties in to be helpful later, great. But I'm focused on the person, the individual who's standing in front of me. Another just open question for considering is what is the difference between I am helping you and we are doing this together? There's this idea in the early days of adaptive skiing, they call it the early days of adaptive skiing and adaptive sports, these savior mentalities. We are here to fix you. You don't need fixing. You are a beautiful person. I am not here to save you. I'm not here to help you. I'm here as a friend to create an environment where you can succeed, to put your needs first, to highlight you as the beautiful person you are. So just ask yourself in your mind, what end of the spectrum do you lean on, or which end have you been on? Do you go back and forth? It feels really good to see someone succeed. We get a lot of value out of that, but having it be focused on the person in front of us is hugely important. Again, gains versus goals. We've hit that a bunch. And then as it applies to us, a lot of the information that Barbara is going over will be on those participant biosheets for our new volunteers who may be joining us tonight. Before you start a lesson, there is a biosheet for your participant, and it will have these listed items here: medication, seizures, motivation, triggers, goal, and any other pertinent information for the ski setting or sliding setting. And then again, this is a very fluid world where we're all going to make mistakes, and we're all going to try to play linguistic gymnastics and put our people first. It can get confusing. When you're uncomfortable, ask questions, either to your participant. I've learned so much from people by just asking them. My mother has a book that came out in two different stages, but she interviewed people that she had spent time with over the years and asked them very direct questions like, how do you feel about autism? How do you feel you are different? Things like this. See what their needs are. Once you build a rapport, once you have connection with people, go deep, get to know your friends. Ask them, ask staff, ask volunteers, ask caregivers, ask questions when you are uncertain. So that's my little spiel, my little soapy box.
Patrick, can I go back and kind of just
Of course.
go over a little bit about that focus on abilities?
Please.
And you guys will hear us say this quite often, is that we are a can-do program, and the range of communication is varying as well. We have very verbal participants, and we have also participants that don't speak very much or aren't able to communicate. And one thing that we really need to focus on is, just because you're not getting an answer right away doesn't mean they're not processing. And I think Barb mentioned that earlier, is that you really need to give time to answer, and getting louder and speaking louder and yelling at them doesn't get your answer or the answer you're looking for. So you really need to take into account what you're asking, and then the necessity for them to be able to process what you're asking in whatever way they do that. Just because you have a cognitive challenge does not mean you're not educated. And we say this as well with physical disabilities, doesn't mean you're not an athlete. So in our program, we accept everybody for who they are, and we bring them to the table as individuals, and focusing on those abilities is super important. And you will, when you bring that positive out in them, you will see the results, and you'll be just like, this is so amazing. Just wanted to hit on that.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, constantly questioning how we're giving information and taking information. I love it. At this point, I'm gonna stop sharing. We can open it up to any questions about either in the chat box, or if you want to raise your hand, I can get to you. And these can be behavior-based questions, or these can be disability awareness questions. Kind of an open board. These can be program questions, but we can answer to the best of our ability. But yeah, this is a time for you. So if you want to either use that raise the hand button or the chat box, now's the time. Let's see, is there anything lingering in the chat that we missed?
Pat, one thing I was just going to share, I got thinking of a little guy. There is Asperger's high functioning children have nicknamed themselves into a group called Aspies, and they'll call themselves the Aspies. So that's just that, it's one of those things that when you talk about the language of how they refer to themselves and the concepts they take on that define themselves, there is a group out there that call themselves the Aspies.
There's a nice consideration on, I see your hand, Brian, I'll be right to you. There's a social consideration on ADHD, and how can you speak to social considerations and how that would affect our coaching for anyone?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
So
do they have social impairments? Was that the question?
Social ramifications of ADHD. Social
ramifications of ADHD. Well, it's that I find personally very individual, because there's one little guy, I just saw him yesterday. This kid, I don't know, the two of us click and we laugh together, but I think I'm one of the only people who really like him. He does not get along with people. Personality trait, I think, is more at play in ADHD. If they are impulsive and they're a little annoying to their peers, they're going to have social difficulties. Early on, children with ADHD don't tune in well. They don't tune in well to the social world, or, as well as the academic world, right? The diagnosis has to be relevant in that it's to the level where it impairs ability to learn and ability to learn academically and socially. Has to be outside of that realm, right? Because you could call a 2-year-old ADHD. So it has to be outside that realm for that neurotypical age. So yes, they do have differences in how they socialize. But again, I find it very personality based, because if they're impulsive and fun and people like them, they're the class clown and everybody laughs at them, right? Versus, and they just need modification to control impulses. They don't have the kind of social impairment that's neurologically driven as a disconnection like autistic spectrum disorder children.
We're gonna do Brian, and then we're gonna get to Denise's game question. I'm gonna ask you to unmute Brian. You're on, Brian. Go for it.
Hey, I wanted to share an experience I had last winter, and it was something we touched on last week in our meeting. I had a teenager with Down syndrome, and our first run or two was great. We got a great rapport, and as we're riding up the chairlift, he began punching me in the face, and I didn't know how to react. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know, and I talked to Sarah later, or actually I called Sarah, and she told me that you need to explain very firmly that this lesson is over if you continue that type of behavior. And I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. It's so important that sometimes, especially with new volunteers, that if you run across a kid who exhibits some sort of really inappropriate behavior, you have to be very firm with them. And that's what I learned, certainly in a nice way, but I thought it was an experience that I should share.
Yeah, you know, it's so weird how sometimes right out of the blue, particularly children with Down syndrome, can like show a different side, you know, like where'd that head come from, you know, like they can be delightful and pleasant and then wallop you. The same tools we talked about last week, what could have contributed to where that behavior came from? Did they get uncomfortable? Did something trigger them that made them feel threatened? Did something trigger them that made them just really want a reaction from you? You know, to really stop and think, what were the contributing factors at this moment that made them lash out? How much cognitive difficulty does that person have? Like, can you talk to them and they're reactive and they understand speech and understand simple directions?
Oh yes, he was verbal. It was you know, he thought it was a positive. He was enjoying it. You know,
okay,
he was laughing.
Okay,
you know,
so the fact that he was enjoying it means he's not understanding that this is not appropriate behavior. He doesn't understand it. That's where the cognitive piece plays in. So in that case, you would put their hands down and say, that is not what we do on a gondola, firmly, but not in a disciplined way, in a teach way. There's a skill set he doesn't have. You know, does somebody roughhouse with him? Does he think it's funny? Does somebody play around physically and he's starting to like you and he thinks, oh, I can do like this to you. And so it's a teaching skill. Like, we do not do that on the thing. And then give an alternative.
Especially on the chairlift. Yeah.
Especially on the chairlift. That's a no-go. And then anytime a child does something that physically risks themselves or somebody else, that's when you've got to do some kind of, you know, take away and separate and send the point home.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I think Barbara,
go ahead.
Sorry, Pat. I think Barbara brings up a good point in how it relates to what we're doing with some of our kids and our adults who are with us is awareness all the time. Like, we're one of the expectations that we would like to enforce is being aware of your environment and what's stimulating around, because it's generally, if it's stimulating you, it's going to stimulate our skiers. And often, even in our bios, there may not have been something written because they haven't come across that in a ski or environmental setting. For instance, we were talking about the PTSD. I run quite a lot of the emblem camps, and PTSD is the prime disability. And so we go over, like, they do the bombing for the avalanche control in the first thing in the morning, and they're spending the night there. And it's like, okay, guys, we're going to have blasting going on. I mean, if that's not going to be a trigger, if they've just come out of combat. So it's addressing the issue before. And if you are with a skier as well, who can communicate, and you're watching their behaviors, because a lot of time the eyes will flicker really fast oftentimes, and I'm generalizing here, but A calming mechanism for kids with autism is a stemming behavior on a chairlift when they're out of control and they're trying to calm themselves down. I mean, you guys all remember the first time on a chairlift is like, whoa. And I mean, and most of our kids getting up on that chairlift is a first time. It could be the riblets going across with the chairlift as well, that tick, 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 or a snow cat coming across. Anything that might trigger is if you can keep the stressors and the outside environment to a minimal, and then either remove them from that situation if you know it's a trigger, that is very beneficial to prevent incidents that can happen like that. But I just want to tell a quick story similar to Brian's, and we talked about this, Barb emphasized this last week, was appropriate behavior. And I was doing a lesson, and this gal out of nowhere, first of all, the day before she punched me in the face and I got a bloody lip, which wasn't fun, and, you know, addressed that this behavior is not okay. And then we kind of sat down with the parents. The following day, literally, she was triggered by the outside. There were so many people, and she just came right in and she grabbed my arm, or she bit me through my coat, drew blood into my coat. Now those are extreme behavioral challenges that we're hoping that you don't have to be a part of, but they do happen because if especially when the parents aren't there and they've left their kids with us, or they're the adults with us, and this is the first time skiing, these are things to be aware of. So being aware of your environment, if you're stimulated, the chances are that your participant is going to be stimulated as well.
Presetting is a good thing, but you need to know the nature of the child to preset well. So for example, like I preset shots because I don't want a child to not trust me. And if I say, oh, it's nothing, it's going to be fine, bye-bye now, and then the nurse goes in and gives them shots, I just lost their trust. So in somebody with a disability, I would preset, this is what is going to be on the gondola, and this is what I expect of you. And I always think of this one time, Patrick, I don't know if you remember this, but we were with cousins, and my sister and I gave them sparklers. Not a good idea with 5-year-old little boys. And we told them everything. Don't touch your hair. Don't touch each other. Don't touch the tent. Don't do this. So one of my nephews took it and proceeded to put it in his mouth. And my sister looked at me and she said, well, you didn't tell him that one. So, and that's the kind of thing on the gondola. Would you stop and think, you're not going to punch me on the gondola? But you might say, hands to yourself, sit quietly, you know. Sometimes autistic spectrum disorder, children with that have a harder time when you preset them because they start ruminating about it before you get on it. So that's why I say you have to know your child before. But I always believe honesty is the best policy because you want them ultimately to trust you. You don't want to say, oh, it's nothing, we're going to get there and it's going to be fine, and they're looking out at a black diamond. Not going to go well.
Yeah, we've got some good questions coming in. Can you clarify the difference between gains and goals, please?
Yes. Oh, the point of that was really the shifting from setting goals in an academic setting to what are we looking for in a recreational setting. We're looking for people to feel that they're making gains. And sometimes we have to set a bar higher educationally. And we have to say, we're reaching, we've got goals. And that's how we work with people who have different levels of ability in classrooms. We have to set goals. So that framework was a review of last week to say what we're really looking for is gains, and they might be very small gains. They might be that you were able to walk in your skis. It might be that you were able to get to that tunnel thing. You know, the gains, if we have a goal set of you're going to learn to, you know, pizza ski this amount, the goal isn't as important as the sense that we're making gains. We want to have it be a positive gain-driven experience.
Definitely. Another great question from Brian. Wait, I might be missing one. Hold on. Oh, will we get to ski with the same participant this year? Yes, we are doing an 8-week program, and we might do a program a little differently for sit skiers, where it's a regular program, but it might not be the same day every week because the needs of those populations are different. So yes, we will have an opportunity to ski with the same person over the 8-week program. And then the next one was, great question, Brian, is it appropriate to ask a person with PTSD what triggers them?
I think it's appropriate to ask, do you see that you're going to have any challenges with skiing? Is there anything you'd like me to know ahead of time? I don't know that I think you need to diagnose their PTSD. The other thing is, and some of that gets into very personal stuff. The other thing is PTSD is not all service driven. There's a lot of PTSD that is not related to armed services. And the triggers can be weird, not necessarily related. So we talked about some real tangible ones like the avalanche thing. And I mean, those are real tangible and they make a lot of sense. But for like the woman who was raped, you might not know why she's frozen at the top of the hill, why she's panicking. And she might not know what the connection was that set her off. So I don't know that, you guys would have to talk about how much information you get from your adult clients and what's relevant. But I think to say to them, is there anything that you think is going to be particularly challenging for you, is very reasonable.
Yeah, and Sarah, maybe can you share the resources at Emblem Campus specifically?
Yeah, and so when we're running our veterans camp, I mean, they have to fill out an assessment and be open to some of their disabilities. I mean, they can't join our program unless they have a cognitive disability or a life-altering disability or TBI or something like that. And so I am privy, or we are privy to that information. But there is a level of sharing that information with our volunteers, because a lot of these veterans especially are working through this, and same with other participants that we don't know. A person that, for example, has been raped, they're working so much all the time with what they're dealing with that it's not our position to diagnose. We are there to provide a recreational activity. If they want to share some of their triggers, and a lot of times people will just start, sharing whatever they want, but that's to drive that out of them is not what we do here.
Right. And maybe to focus on what this gives you, like, I really hope this can give you a top of the mountain experience and a sense of seeing a bigger world and the freedom of the movement and the air that you feel, using the visuals of what you have there that is so gorgeous up there. That I think that's what I've been told from the clients I've been working with. When they stay in the house and they're kind of staying in their problem and in their trauma, it's really bad for them. Whereas if we can get them active and doing things, and I think your forum is absolutely fantastic for PTSD. I'm not an expert. I don't want to present myself at all in that. I have very few patients with it, and they are teaching me about it as we go now. Like anything, I've learned what I know about disabilities from the people I've worked with.
There was last week, Barbara, there was a whole bunch of the people coming in talking about this gains and goals. And Patrick and I were speaking about this as well, is this concept of gains is so appropriate for our program, because just the tiniest, like Barbara was saying, these tiny little steps are progress, and socialization and new advancements. And sometimes when you set a goal for some of our kids, and I'm generalizing as well, if you reach that goal, then they can get lazy and say, I nailed it, done. So if you're always reaching for a gain or something a little bit more that you see that they can give you, like, oh, I bet you could, do you want to try this? Or do you want to try to catch me? Or do you know, these little personal gains, I love it, Barb. I love it because because you can always dial it back. You want to move forward, but you can always dial things back.
I think one of the things that in my career I might have done, that knowing people as adults now and having help with their school programming when they were younger, we hung so many carrots. It felt like we were always setting a goal and then, oh, look at, you got this. And then some of these kids got to college, and where's the learning supposed to come from? Like at some point it's supposed to be self-efficacy, right? I'm doing this because this feels good inside of me. And in the case of skiing, I'm doing this because this feels good and this is fun. And this is, so you want to get to that place. I think when you're setting the goal, there's, in a lot of cases, there's this reinforcement tied to it. And again, here's a sticker, here's a, you earned a pizza day, and we've got to get it internal. Got to feel good. That's what drives people to do things. It feels good.
Love it. Love
let's
it.
do kind of a final round of questioning. Any, do you want to raise your hand? I'm looking through the things. I think we missed one question up top, but it might have been covered. Can there be cognitive issues with cerebral palsy?
Yes, there can be.
Yes.
Depends on the degree of disability, and it depends on where the area of brain injury is. For it to be cerebral palsy, that is a motor system tied to the cerebral. That's how it comes from, right? So it's the motor system is paired with the, where the brain tracking is impaired, affects the motor system. Sometimes that brain impact can also get into the cognitive areas.
Excellent. Well, then this has been just about an hour. There's been great questions. If there are any other questions that come up, please reach out to us, either Patrick, myself, Sarah, or Barbara, my mother. If any of us, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. I'll put my email in the chat box again for those who don't have it.
And if you get any questions on diagnoses or meds or anything like that, I'm happy to be an ongoing consult, Patrick.
Sounds great. You're a great resource. Even if you have, say you have someone you've been skiing with for years, or you want to help them make gains, or you just want to bounce some ideas off of somebody. Those are great conversations to have. I don't know many of you. I know some of you from skiing around, but I don't know many of you. But I genuinely love what you give to the program, and I look forward to meeting and getting to know and skiing and sharing these experiences with all of you.
We're lucky to have you. And just what Patrick is saying as well is that next week we're going to focus specifically on really divide into sort of rooms to talk about more of these behavioral situations, so that for especially you guys that are all new can hear some of the things that go on and figure out how you're going to process that, because sometimes there is some repetitiveness with some of our participants, and it's nice to just say, okay, maybe I can handle it this way, or oh, I didn't know that was going on, because if you're doing 2 lessons or you're doing 400 lessons, you know, having that awareness will benefit your ability to be an amazing volunteer, and you're there right now with us. So thank you. Thanks for coming. Happy gobble gobble.
Yeah.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. You will get as much from them as you give to them. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
And yes, and before you run away, same time next week, 6 o'clock, like Sarah was saying, 6 o'clock, it's Colleen Smith, our new staff member, who is an occupational therapist and is going to focus on sensory needs and behavior with a lot of real world, like Sarah was saying. So we would love to have you. Great. We're going to close the meeting now, and if anyone wants to hang out or if anyone wants to chat, feel free to stick around. If not, stuff your faces and enjoy the holiday. And if you get out skiing, you won't have a bigger smile than mine. Challenge. So yeah, we'll see you next week. But we'll be hanging out here if anyone wants to chat. We can unmute people and whatnot. But thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Barb.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Talk to you tomorrow, Patrick.
I know. Let's see here. I bet
Let's
you.
unmute everybody. I like
had,
last week when everyone wanted to waffle on.
how many we got?
Leave. I don't want to leave.
You don't have to leave. You can.
You don't have to, Barbara. It was so fun last week.
How do I
I
unmute
get to see
everyone?
you guys. I get to see Patrick. Come on in, Jim.
I'm
Say
back.
hi.
Oh, hey,
Jim
Jim.
got ice cream.
I love AI.
Jim wants to talk. How do computers relate to skiing? I don't know.
How
We
do I
need to
unmute
unmute. Patrick,
people?
you can only unmute everybody. I can't.
I'm figuring it out. Hold on. Let's see here.
Thank you very much.
I just okay. I just allowed people to unmute themselves. So if anyone wants to unmute themselves, feel free. I think I changed that setting. Yep.
All right.
So if you want to chat.
Barb. Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye, Dad. Happy Turkey Day.
Bye, Sarah.
Hi, happy Thanksgiving.
Goodbye.
Who's there? Anyone else want to chat?
I love it.
Toss it around. Brian, you out of here? You should be able to unmute yourselves. If you can't, you can't. I'll ask you all to unmute, and then if you want to, you can. Totally up to you. See if we'll do it that way. Did I get everybody? For some reason, it lets me unmute Hank, but it asks me permission to unmute everybody else. Hank must have a set.
Hey.
Hi, Brian.
I don't know if this is a good idea to mute you,
We have
kid.
our computers right next to each other. Oh, your mom left. I had a question for her. Oh, well.
Oh, what is your question? Maybe we can
No, I
relate.
can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, that's because Dan turned his sound up.
Oh, if you want to issue your question, we can get it to her, and I can definitely.
Well, I mean, maybe you know the answer. I mean, I guess I feel a little guilty about the fact that my very first participant was a young lady with Down syndrome who I adore and still see every once in a while. I'm in touch with her family and her. And like the first season that I worked with her, and I had no experience whatsoever dealing with any kind of, is that true? Well, essentially no experience. And I used exactly the thing that your mom was talking about not doing, which was, but it worked with her. It's like setting goals. So I would say to her at the beginning of every session, I'm like, okay, what do you want to work on today? And she had told me the very first day I met her that she was a princess. I bet you know who I'm talking about. And I couldn't find a tiara for her, but I found like these little stick-on, like, you know, like rhinestones. And so I bought a package of those. And so for every goal that she was able to, like, you know, I would let her set the goals for each lesson. Maybe they're gains. I don't, you know, I'm still struggling with the wording. But I'd say, okay, what do you want to work on today? And she would say, okay, name 3 things. I mean, well, first I would say, how many gems do you want to earn today? And she would tell me 3. Okay, I'm like, well, what 3 things do you want to do or work on to get those gems, to earn them? And then, you know, we would work on those things and I would give her the number of gems that she earned from doing those things. I guess I know that that's not exactly, I know that's frowned upon in a certain way, but it worked really well with her.
Well, you engaged and you asked her what she needed. We don't need to have all the answers going in. We can figure it out as we go, and every person is an individual. So you figured out an effective way. That's beautiful. Is Dan hiding behind his black screen? Is he right next to you, Jody?
He is right next to me, but he's here. Maybe he'll turn his video. I think he's going to turn his video on. Go ahead, do it.
I have no video.
I wanted to thank you, Dan, preemptively for going. I heard you're going up to the hut on Friday, and I wanted to thank you for doing that. That's
No worries.
it's a nice crew going up there. So that's awesome.
I'll ask a question as long as you made me unmute. Given that in the general population, not everybody enjoys skiing, and with a lot of, especially I know the Bridger crew, there's a lot of people that somebody else is making the decision that they should go skiing for them. How do we know, or how do we handle somebody that just may not enjoy skiing? And I know I've seen some at Bridger every year. I know one in particular last year, but you know, I mean, you know, as a volunteer, and I mean, for me, maybe because I've done it a long time, I can figure out something. But I think especially for some of the new volunteers, it can be overwhelming if you think like, I'm supposed to ski with this person, I'm supposed to teach them, and they just don't enjoy it. They don't like it. They don't want to, but maybe can't verbalize it. Don't do that, please.
Did you have a snowball fight and make hockey sticks or something last year with this person?
But anyway, that was just a question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Some people did not choose to be there. Some people are brought there in other ways, and have limited ability to communicate with us. But over time, we can figure out ways that they are communicating with us. And maybe that's a hard conversation, but you're bringing up a good point. It's about them. And if someone's been around for a long time and they don't enjoy it, maybe opening that conversation up to their support structure, to them, having them involved, and to figure out, is this a place where we need to be? Recreation is healthy in many ways, other than, but we don't want to force it on people. So that's kind of like a case-by-case basis. But yeah, just because they don't have to like it, nobody has to like it, but maybe we can, and having all that time, maybe they enjoy a piece of it. So maybe they don't enjoy the skiing, maybe they learn to love one specific piece of spending time with a person they like, or doing something associated, or telling jokes or listening to jokes, or can we add other things in that they may enjoy? But it's a very situational, but great consideration. Yeah, because that just shows that you're in a place where, yeah, it's not about us, it's about them, and that's a beautiful thing.
Well, and that's where I was saying, just for, if nothing else, some of the newer volunteers to understand, that, hey, bounce it off you guys or whatever, if you think that's a situation. As Brian said, that was one of the things I always thought is, go for a hike in the snow, which at Bridger isn't as great an opportunity, but go do something. I mean, some of these kids might like snowshoeing across country. A lot of people, it's it's that fear factor in the downhill. So yeah, it's just something I brought up in previous years, but yeah, it's something to consider.
Is there an opportunity for them to like cross-country ski, or can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can, I mean, we're listening to you through Dan because it's reverberating, but
Yeah, I know.
yes.
It won't let me unmute again. I don't know why, but I mean, is it possible for, us to have snowshoes, or maybe we do in the hut, so that like if there's a kid that's not like is just, like the school programs, clearly I think what Dan was referring to, and like just having snowshoes so that, hey, let's try these, and like do something different with that.
And
I love that.
in the past as well, there's been kind of a stop. So a lot of the buses who have people that might not want to ski will drop people off at Bridger, and then they'll roll over to Crosscut, and then the timing of those experiences were overlapped. So if people really didn't want to ski, or if it wasn't their thing, they could just be taken to Crosscut in the same experience, and then come back with the same people they were there with. So yeah, promoting our other programs is a good idea. And this year, there will be a snowshoe and cross-country program. Whether that's at Crosscut or around town is still being worked out. But yeah, hopefully to give it. And then, as I think I mentioned it, one of these, maybe I'm losing my mind, but I spoke with the ice skating crew, the people who run ice skating. We're going to try to expand that program for spring for sure. And then depending on this season, maybe in the winters going in the future, because just trying kind of getting some feedback from participants about what they like and where they think that can go. Put some real good ideas in our minds to service people. So yeah.
Hey, Dan, one thing too is that a couple of years ago, I had a little guy who he was nonverbal and pretty weak muscle tone. And so we kept putting him in a bi-ski, and he would be crying and bawling and crying. And you're like, this kid hates this, but his parents are like, he's going to get in here. And I rode the chair and I'm like, this kid doesn't hate this. He has more potential to do something else. And we took him out of the bi-ski, put him on ski legs. He was done with ski legs, and now he's a stand-up skier and cannot wait to get out there and ski. So we've got sort of that, different, view on how to figure out what kids need, even if they can't talk or watching. And it's so fun to see that, because it doesn't always have to, we do have kids that don't like, and I love that idea of having the snowshoes available.
And that was part of my point, is we don't always know, but it's something to consider right before you just say, hey, you got to do this, because you're here for 2 hours. And, so yeah, it's just something to think about.
I think we'll definitely, I think there's a few things that we really need to bring up in some of our talks, on these Zoom talks with the new volunteers, especially, because it feels like a lot of work if the kids aren't enjoying it, and it makes it, then they feel guilty that they're not being good volunteers, and we never want anybody to feel like you suck, because that isn't the case at all. We are so happy that everybody's here, but you might have a shitty day one day, they might have forgot to take their meds, but there's always alternatives, and there's no reason why we can't brainstorm amongst each other and say, hey, because sometimes we've had kids that work really well with one person and then don't work well at all, or then that person isn't working at all, and next thing you know, someone's taken them out of their box and they're like on fuego and loving every minute of it. So I think we have to play around with all this.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to understand that sometimes there are people that
like you said, are having a bad day, and I love what Brian's point. I mean, I actually did that. I was hut mom one year because I had to have hip surgery, so I wasn't allowed to ski for a while. And I helped a volunteer just take a kid that was absolutely like, I am not putting on the boots, I'm not skiing. And it was his first time. And like, so his first few times we just took the sled out and we played with him in the snow. Well, you know what? That kid is now ice skating and skiing.
Awesome.
You know, and so like sometimes you have to like push a little bit, but you know, there's a balance, you know, so it's kind of hard to, yeah, I don't have to tell that to you, Sarah, but.
Yeah, I see Tracy unmuted. Are you there, Tracy? Or you have any?
Oh, yeah, I'm here. I'm just enjoying all the chatter because I love this.
Oh, great. Well, I just wanted to say hello. I saw you unmuted. I didn't know if you wanted to chime in.
I did ask in the chat a little bit earlier about, I missed last week with the COVID discussion. So did that ever get posted up?
It has not been posted up yet.
I can put that on the.
But it will be. But I sent everybody the link to access it.
We
You did finally put it on?
No, but we changed how we store them, so I'll be able to put this one and the other one up there tomorrow.
And
on the YouTube.
Was last week's the first meeting?
Last week's was the first behavior training, and there was a COVID training before that.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Or webinar, I guess. And then there's one next week as well.
What are you having for Thanksgiving?
I'm going to the corral.
Really?
Yeah, they're doing a turkey dinner.
So am I, but you're not invited.
I was going to have a funeral for my pet turkey and call it a celebration of life and serve refreshments for like 25.
Yeah, the crowd, they do a big one. Yeah, I stopped going there for reasons I won't get into.
I can get you in.
Yeah. Well, cool.
Probably shut the recording off.
No, this is gold. We're keeping the recording on. But I think I'm gonna step out and fry a turkey.
Happy gobble gobble, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Bye all.